The afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of Reynolds Restoration, casting golden beams across the concrete floor where a 1976 Harley-Davidson shovelhead engine lay partially disassembled. Morgan Reynolds wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her forearm, leaving a streak of grease like war paint across her face. Her calloused fingers delicately adjusted the timing gear, while her ear hovered near the exposed valves listening, knowing the machine in ways that went beyond mere mechanics. The distant rumble came first as a whisper, then grew to a growl, multiple V-twin engines approaching fast. Morgan's head snapped up her shoulders, tensing almost imperceptibly. Most wouldn't have noticed the change in her posture, but there was something in her eyes, a sudden alertness, a cold calculation that didn't belong on a small-town mechanic's face. The coffee mug on her workbench vibrated, teetered, then fell as the rumble outside intensified. Morgan's hand shot out too fast, too precise, catching the mug a mere inch from shattering on the concrete. Not a drop spilled. She set the mug down slowly, deliberately, then reached in for the red bandana always tied around her neck. She wiped her hands methodically, one finger at a time, her gaze never leaving the front entrance. The thunderous roar of motorcycles filled the air as they pulled into the gravel lot. Morgan Reynolds wasn't preparing to greet customers. She was preparing for visitors. Thunder Valley, Arizona wasn't a place you found by accident. Nestled along a forgotten stretch of Route 66, it was a town that time seemed to have abandoned somewhere in the late 1970s. The buildings stood weathered but proud monuments to an America that existed in memories and old photographs. Roadside diners with chrome countertops, family-owned hardware stores with wooden floors that creaked with history, and gas stations where attendants still pumped your fuel if you asked nicely. Reynolds Restoration occupied a converted Texaco station built in 1952, its vintage gas pumps still standing out front like mechanical sentinels, decorative now, but restored to their former glory. The neon sign above the entrance buzzed and flickered at night, a beacon for motorists and motorcycle enthusiasts seeking salvation for their troubled machines. Inside the shop was a testament to American automotive history. Aged advertisements for Pennzoil and Champion spark plugs adorned the walls alongside faded posters of Evel Knievel's daring jumps. A glass display case housed carburetors from the 1950s, each polished to a museum-quality shine. In the corner, a Wurlitzer jukebox fully functional played Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son, the sound crackling with authentic vintage warmth. On the wall behind the service counter hung a sun-bleached price board from 1965 advertising oil changes for $3.50 and listing gasoline at 25 cents per gallon. Next to it, a rare promotional clock from Gulf Oil cast a soft glow across a collection of license plates from all 50 states' trophies from the motorcycles and cars Morgan had brought back to life. The heart of the shop was the garage bay where Morgan had installed a modern hydraulic lift alongside period-correct tools and equipment. Specialty wrenches for knucklehead engines hung in perfect alignment with valve adjustment tools for panheads. A partially restored 1959 Duo Glide sat in the corner, its frame stripped to bare metal, waiting for Morgan's magic touch. Across the street stood Martha's Diner, a chrome and neon establishment with checkered floors and red vinyl booths. The two businesses had formed a symbiotic relationship. Martha's coffee fueled Morgan's long hours, and Morgan's restoration work attracted the kind of clientele who appreciated both vintage motorcycles and homemade apple pie. At sunset, when the desert air cooled and the neon signs buzzed to life, Thunder Valley transformed into a living postcard of Americana, a place where you could almost believe the American dream still slumbered, waiting to be awakened. Morgan Reynolds wasn't what most people expected when they first walked into Reynolds Restoration. Standing 5'8" with a lean athletic frame that betrayed a lifetime of physical conditioning, she defied the stereotype of the burly male mechanic. Her auburn hair was typically pulled back in a practical bun while she worked, revealing high cheekbones and eyes the color of worn denim blue that had seen too much sun and too many miles. She dressed simply, classic Levi's 501s, worn thin at the knees, a plain white or black t-shirt, and steel-toed Red Wing boots that had molded perfectly to her feet over years of use. The red bandana around her neck, her trademark, was the only splash of color. She allowed herself a gift from someone long ago whose name she never mentioned. Her hands told her true story, strong, nimble fingers with calluses built up over thousands of hours of mechanical work. No nail polish, no rings, nothing that could catch on a moving part or interfere with her connection to the machines she brought back to life. Bikes don't lie, she often said. They tell you exactly what's wrong if you know how to listen. And Morgan knew how to listen better than most. She could diagnose engine problems by ear, distinguishing between valve tap, piston slap, and worn bearings just by the subtle variations in pitch and rhythm. Her specialty was Harley-Davidson motorcycles from the golden era, particularly the complex shovelhead engines that had frustrated mechanics since the 1960s. Locals swore she had some kind of supernatural connection with machines. Motorcycles that other shops had declared beyond repair would roar to life under her care. Word spread through the biker community, bringing riders hundreds of miles out of their way to have Morgan work on their prized machines. Yet for all her skill, there were peculiarities about Morgan that didn't quite fit the profile of a small-town mechanic. A thin scar ran across her right forearm, too straight, too precise to be an accident. When startled, her hand would sometimes move toward her hip, as if reaching for something that wasn't there. And though she appeared slender, customers who'd seen her effortlessly lift engine blocks noticed the whipcord strength that belied her frame. Then there was her gaze, sometimes distant, scanning rooftops and exits even in familiar surroundings. And the way she positioned herself in rooms back to walls, eyes on doors. Small things easily dismissed, but suggesting a life lived with danger far beyond anything Thunder Valley had ever known. When asked about her past, Morgan's answers were vague but consistent. Army brat, she'd say with a casual shrug. Moved around a lot, learned mechanics from my dad. The explanation satisfied most, and those who sensed there might be more to the story knew better than to pry. Morgan had been in Thunder Valley for 6 years now, long enough to become a fixture but still considered a newcomer by locals whose families had been there for generations. Long enough to build a life, but not long enough to outrun whatever shadows occasionally darkened her eyes when she thought no one was looking. The social heart of Morgan's world consisted of 3 people who had over time become something like family in a life otherwise defined by solitude and work. Earl Wilson represented the old guard of Thunder Valley. At 78, the former sheriff still stood ramrod straight, his weathered face and calloused hands testament to a lifetime of service. His silver hair was always neatly trimmed, and he favored Western shirts with pearl snap buttons pressed and starched, even for casual visits to the garage. Morgan had met Earl her first week in town when his vintage Ford pickup had broken down outside her newly purchased shop. What began as a simple repair job evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect and unspoken understanding. Earl never asked about the nightmares that sometimes left Morgan bleary-eyed in the mornings, and she never questioned why a widower with a military-grade gun safe needed quite so many weapons for hunting. And they communicated in comfortable silences, shared coffees, and occasional chess games where neither felt compelled to fill the quiet with unnecessary words. Over time, Earl had become the father figure Morgan had lost, or perhaps never had. "You remind me of my late wife Caroline," he told her once. "Same steel in your spine, same way of seeing right through nonsense." Coming from Earl, it was the highest compliment imaginable. Danny Wilson Earl's 16-year-old grandson was Morgan's apprentice and frequent source of both frustration and pride. After his parents' divorce 3 years earlier, Danny had moved in with his grandfather and promptly developed an obsession with motorcycles. Earl had brought the boy to Morgan hat in hand, asking if she might consider teaching him. "He needs direction," Earl had said quietly, "and a man should know how to work with his hands." Morgan had agreed, though she'd never seen herself as a teacher. Danny's enthusiasm made up for his initial clumsiness, and he soaked up mechanical knowledge like desert sand after rain. Under Morgan's tutelage, he was slowly transforming from a sullen teenager into a young man with purpose and growing confidence. His quick mind and deft fingers showed promise, though his attention to detail still needed work, a fact that would soon prove significant. Martha Jenkins owned the diner across the street, a 65-year-old widow with bottle blonde hair, always set in perfect curls. She kept Morgan fed despite the mechanic's irregular hours, occasionally forcing her way into the garage with plates of meatloaf or chicken pot pie when Morgan worked late. "Machines don't care if you're hungry," Martha would scold, "but I do." Martha served as Morgan's connection to the town's social fabric, providing gentle updates on local gossip and serving as an unofficial ambassador to newcomers. Her diner was Thunder Valley's information exchange, And what Martha didn't know about local happenings wasn't worth knowing. Sheriff James Cooper rounded out Morgan's inner circle, though their relationship remained more formal than her others. At 45, Cooper was respected, but still proving himself in Earl's long shadow. He'd developed an obvious attraction to Morgan over the years, one she neither encouraged nor discouraged. There was something safe in this ambiguity, a comfortable distance that suited them both. Cooper often stopped by the shop under the pretense of vehicle maintenance questions, bringing coffee and lingering longer than necessary. Morgan appreciated his steady presence and the regular updates on county matters he provided, though she suspected he sensed she was hiding something. As a lawman, his curiosity was professional as much as personal, but he never pressed, perhaps afraid of what answers might reveal. Together, these four formed the core of Morgan's carefully constructed life in Thunder Valley, a life built on half-truths and selective omissions, but genuine in the connections it fostered, a life that was about to be severely tested. The morning started like any other at Reynolds Restoration. Morgan arrived before dawn, unlocking the shop as the eastern sky barely hinted at daybreak. The desert air still held the night's chill as she fired up the ancient coffee maker and began her daily ritual of cleaning tools and preparing the workspace. By 8, Danny had arrived, attempting to sneak in unnoticed after oversleeping again. "You're late, Wilson," Morgan called without looking up from the carburetor she was rebuilding. "That's 3 times this week." "Sorry, Morgan," Danny mumbled, hanging his jacket on the hook by the door. Alarm didn't go off. "Mm-hmm. If you spent half as much time maintaining your alarm clock as you do that phone, you might make it here on schedule." There was no real bite in her words, just the familiar rhythm of their morning exchange. The day progressed with comfortable routine. Morgan worked on the shovelhead engine while Danny tackled basic maintenance on a newer Sportster. The morning stretched into afternoon. The garage door rolled up to catch the breeze as the temperature climbed. It happened shortly after lunch. Danny was retrieving tools from the tall metal cabinet in the corner, a massive industrial storage unit filled with specialized equipment. Morgan had warned him repeatedly about its tendency to tip if not properly balanced when the drawers were extended. "Hey, Morgan, where's the timing light?" Danny called, pulling open the top drawer while simultaneously reaching for a higher shelf. Morgan heard it before she saw it, the telltale creak of metal shifting the cabinet, beginning its inevitable forward fall with Danny directly in its path. Later, she would regret not controlling her reaction better, but instinct took over before conscious thought could intervene. She moved with a speed and precision that had no place in a motorcycle shop. 3 long strides brought her across the garage. Her body tucked into a roll that avoided a workbench, then uncoiled with explosive power. Her left arm pushed Danny clear, while her right hand caught the edge of the falling cabinet, 850 pounds of steel and tools stopping its descent with a single arm. For a moment, the garage froze in an impossible tableau. Morgan, feet planted in a fighting stance, one arm extended to hold the massive cabinet at a 45-degree angle, her face betraying no strain despite the tremendous weight. Then reality reasserted itself. She adjusted her grip and carefully guided the cabinet back to its upright position, securing it against the wall before turning to Danny. "You okay?" she asked, her voice deliberately casual. Danny stared, mouth agape. "How did you—" "That thing weighs—" From the doorway came a low whistle. Earl stood there, coffee cup in hand, having arrived just in time to witness the entire scene. "That's some impressive reaction time, Morgan," he said quietly, his eyes narrow and assessing. "Don't believe I've ever seen a mechanic move quite like that before." Morgan brushed her hands on her jeans, avoiding Earl's gaze. "Adrenaline," she said with a shrug. "You'd be surprised what you can lift when someone's in danger." Earl nodded slowly, unconvinced. "Indeed. Seems those reflexes of yours aren't just good for catching falling coffee mugs." "Guess not," Morgan replied, turning back to her workbench, a clear signal the discussion was over. But as she resumed her work, a brief flash crossed her mind, a memory of another time, another place. Desert heat far more intense than Arizona's. The weight of body armor, a helicopter's downwash, a Silver Eagle insignia clutched in her palm as a superior officer spoke words now lost to time. She pushed the memory away, focusing on the engine before her. The past had no place here, not in Thunder Valley, not in the life she'd built. Earl said nothing more about the incident, but his eyes followed her with newfound curiosity for the rest of the afternoon. In his long career in law enforcement, he'd seen enough to recognize train movements when they appeared, and what he'd witnessed wasn't the lucky save of a motorcycle mechanic. It was the practiced motion of someone with very specialized training. The question was what kind of. The walls of Reynolds Restoration told stories to those who knew how to read them, particularly to men of a certain age who recognized the cultural touchstones of an America now fading into history. Above the customer waiting area hung a sun-faded poster for The Outlaw Josie Wales, Clint Eastwood's hard-eyed stare challenging anyone who entered the shop to question their purpose. Beside it, John Wayne as Rooster Cogburn in True Grit embodied the rugged individualism Morgan seemed to value in her own quiet way. The shop's radio, a restored Philco from 1962, played a carefully curated selection of classic rock and country that seemed frozen in time. The Rolling Stones gave way to Lynyrd Skynyrd, then Johnny Cash, then Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USSA. The anthem, often misunderstood as patriotic when its lyrics spoke of Vietnam veterans abandoned by their country. Earl sat in his usual chair, nursing a coffee as Morgan worked. Danny had been sent home early, a rare occurrence after the incident with the cabinet. The old lawman sensed Morgan needed space, and his presence provided a comfortable buffer between her and her thoughts. "You remember the oil crisis back in '73? Earl asked seemingly out of nowhere. Morgan looked up from her work, grateful for the distraction. "Before my time," she said, "but I've heard stories." Earl nodded, settling into a storytelling posture. Lines around the block, at gas stations. Fistfights breaking out over who got the last few gallons. Changed everything in America, the way we thought about cars, about energy, about our place in the world. He gestured toward a framed newspaper on the wall, a yellowed front page from the Arizona Republic dated October 1973, headlining the OPEC embargo. "That's when the Japanese started eating Detroit's lunch," he continued. "Folks wanted fuel efficiency suddenly. Toyota and Honda started looking mighty appealing compared to gas-guzzling American steel." Morgan nodded, familiar with this narrative of American automotive decline. "But you know what never gave in?" Earl pointed toward the Harley parts Morgan was working on. "These beasts, inefficient as hell, loud as sin, and American as apple pie. People kept buying them even when gas hit prices that would make your eyes water." "They represent something," Morgan said quietly. "Freedom, independence." "Exactly." Earl's eyes crinkled with approval. "When I was sheriff, I could tell you everything about a man by what he drove. The accountants and lawyers bought those foreign sports cars. But the men who worked with their hands, who built this country, they rode American iron." The radio switched to a news break, the announcer's voice discussing the upcoming 30th anniversary of Super Bowl 45, when the New York Giants defeated the Buffalo Bills in 1991 during the height of Operation Desert Storm, a game remembered as much for Whitney Houston's stirring national anthem as for the athletic competition. Earl's expression darkened slightly at the mention of the Gulf War. "A lot of good men came back from that sandbox," he said quietly. "Not like Nam, but still, war changes people." Morgan's hands stilled momentarily, her back to Earl, then resumed their mechanical dance across the engine components. "Some found their way back to civilian life just fine," Earl continued. "Others, well, they needed something to belong to again. Brotherhood. Purpose." He paused. "That's how some of these motorcycle clubs started, you know. Veterans looking for that sense of unit cohesion they lost when they took off the uniform." Morgan nodded, her focus seemingly on the carburetor jets she was cleaning, but her posture betrayed her attention to Earl's words. "Not all those clubs went bad," the old sheriff added, "but enough did. When you take men trained for violence and drop them back into civilian life without support." He let the thought hang unfinished. "Why are you telling me this, Earl?" Morgan asked, finally turning to face him. The former sheriff met her gaze steadily. "Because I think you might understand better than most." Before Morgan could respond, the radio news shifted to a local story that instantly captured both their attention: reports of escalating tensions between local businesses and a motorcycle club called the Desert Vipers, recently established in the county. The Desert Vipers Motorcycle Club had appeared in Navajo County approximately 8 months earlier, establishing their clubhouse in an abandoned roadhouse 30 miles outside Thunder Valley. Their arrival had been noted, but not immediately concerning motorcycle clubs passed through the area, regularly drawn by the long, empty highways and spectacular desert vistas. This group, however, had put down roots and begun expanding their presence. Initially, they presented themselves as just another riding club, organizing charity poker runs and appearing at local events. But whispers had started protection, money demanded from businesses in neighboring towns, rivals warned away from territories suddenly claimed as Viper turf, and rumors of drug trafficking along the I-40 corridor. Sheriff Cooper had monitored their growth with increasing concern, particularly after identifying their leadership. Victor Venom Keller, the club's president, cut an imposing figure at 48 years old. Standing 6'2", with the muscular build of someone who maintained military discipline long after leaving service, Keller wore his combat experience in his bearing and in the carefully placed military tattoos visible beneath his leather cut. His salt and pepper hair was kept in a tight fade, and the burn scars on the left side of his neck spoke of battlefield injuries. Intelligence gathered by Cooper's department indicated Keller had served in special operations during Desert Storm, though the specifics of his service record remain classified. After his discharge, he had briefly worked as a private military contractor before falling off the grid for several years, re-emerging as the leader of the newly formed Desert Vipers. His second-in-command, Mike Crusher Davis, presented a more straightforward threat. A former Marine with a dishonorable discharge, Davis stood 6'5" and weighed close to 280 pounds, with a reputation for solving problems with his fists before his brain. His military career had ended after a bar fight left 3 civilians hospitalized, and his civilian record included arrest for assault and battery, though charges had mysteriously disappeared before trial. The core membership consisted primarily of veterans from Desert Storm and other conflicts. Men who had returned home to find the country they'd fought for had little use for their specialized skills. Many struggled with PTSD, substance abuse, and the challenge of reintegrating into a society that simultaneously venerated and feared them. Their motorcycles reflected their military precision and attention to detail. The Desert Vipers favored Harley-Davidson touring models, Road Kings, and Street Glides, predominantly modified for both performance and intimidation. Their bikes featured custom paint in desert camouflage patterns, reinforced frames, and the distinctive rumble of Milwaukee 8 114 cubic inch engines tuned to maximize both power and acoustic presence. What had begun as a brotherhood of displaced veterans had evolved into something darker, as legitimate opportunities failed to materialize. The VA's notorious bureaucracy and inadequate mental health services left many members seeking alternative treatments for their psychological wounds. Pills led to harder drugs, which led to distribution, which led to territory disputes. The familiar descent from brotherhood to criminal enterprise played out yet again. Yet beneath the criminal veneer lay a complexity that simple law enforcement approaches failed to address. These were men trained by their country, then abandoned by it, left to forge their own path with skills ill-suited for civilian life. Their loyalty to each other often remained the only constant in lives marked by fractured relationships and lost purpose. For Victor Keller, the Desert Vipers represented both redemption and revenge, though against whom and for what perceived slight remained unclear to those watching the club's rise with growing concern. What was clear was their pattern of expansion, systematic and strategic, targeting vulnerable businesses first, then using those footholds to secure broader territory. And now, according to the radio report, their attention had turned to Thunder Valley. Sheriff Cooper's cruiser pulled up outside Reynolds Restoration, just as the afternoon was fading into evening. Earl had left an hour earlier claiming a dinner engagement, but the lingering tension from their conversation remained. Morgan watched Cooper approach through the garage bay, noting his unusually stiff posture. "Sheriff," she greeted him, wiping her hands on a shop rag, "don't tell me the department charger is giving you trouble again." Cooper managed a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not today, Morgan. This is more of an informational visit." Something in his tone caused Morgan to set down her tools and give him her full attention. "Sounds serious." "Could be." Cooper removed his hat, a gesture he reserved for difficult conversations. "You heard the radio report about the Desert Vipers," Morgan nodded. "Earl and I caught it earlier. Sounds like they're making moves closer to town." "They're not just closer, they're here." Cooper's jaw tightened. "Martha called me this afternoon. 2 of them came into the diner, sat down, ordered coffee, and then explained to her how dangerous it is to run a business without proper protection." Morgan's expression hardened. "They threatened Martha." "Not explicitly. That's their game implications, suggestions, scenarios of what might happen without their help." Cooper sighed. Martha told them she's been running her diner for 30 years without their protection, and they just smiled and said times are changing. What did they want? 500 a week to start. Cooper's disgust was evident, said the rate would adjust based on business volume. Morgan whistled low. That's steep for a diner in a town this size. It's not about the money, it's about control. Cooper replaced his hat, adjusting it with practiced precision. They're mapping the territory, figuring out who'll fold and who'll resist. And Martha? Told them she'd think about it. Smart move, buys us some time. Cooper hesitated. Morgan, I'm making the rounds to all the businesses in town. These guys, they're not your typical troublemakers. They're organized, disciplined, military backgrounds, most of them. I can handle myself, Sheriff. Morgan's voice carried a quiet confidence that made Cooper study her more carefully. I don't doubt that, but there's only a handful of deputies in the county, and we can't be everywhere. If they come around, I'll call, Morgan assured him, though they both recognized the platitude for what it was. Cooper nodded, seeming to wrestle with something else. Finally, he added, there's another thing you should know. They've been asking questions about you specifically. Morgan stilled. What kind of questions? About your business, how long you've been here, where you came from. Cooper's gaze was searching now. They seemed particularly interested in your client list who brings their bikes to you, especially from out of town. Any idea why TM? Cooper shrugged. Control the mechanic, control the riders who depend on them. Plus, you've built quite a reputation. The best Harley specialist in 3 counties means a lot of influential clients. Morgan nodded, her mind already cataloging the implications. I appreciate the heads-up, Sheriff. Just be careful, Morgan. Cooper's professional demeanor slipped, momentarily revealing genuine concern. These aren't men who take rejection well. After Cooper left, Morgan locked the front door and switched the sign to closed. She moved through the shop with purposeful efficiency, checking windows and ensuring the garage bay was secure. Then she went to the office and unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk, a drawer that hadn't been opened in over 2 years. Inside lay a small security monitor connected to cameras she'd installed when she first purchased the building. Most people assumed the visible security cameras covering the shop entrance were the extent of her surveillance system. They weren't aware of the secondary network military-grade cameras hidden in inconspicuous locations around the property perimeter. Morgan switched on the monitor and began reviewing the day's footage. Cooper's warning about the Vipers asking questions troubled her more than she'd let on. Questions meant attention, and attention was the one thing she'd spent 6 years carefully avoiding. The footage from camera 3 caught her eye that a black Dodge Ram with tinted windows had parked across the street for 27 minutes that morning. The angle wasn't ideal, but she could make out a driver remaining in the vehicle, seemingly watching the shop. The timestamp showed this had occurred while she was working with Danny on the Sportster. She continued reviewing footage and found the truck had returned briefly in the afternoon this time, with a passenger who took photos of her building with a telephoto lens. Morgan zoomed in as much as the resolution allowed, catching a glimpse of the passenger's arm and the distinctive snake tattoo winding from wrist to bicep. Reconnaissance, she murmured to herself. Not random intimidation, but targeted surveillance. Morgan closed the security feed and reached deeper into the drawer past the monitor to the false bottom beneath. Her fingers found the hidden latch, and the compartment opened with a soft click. Inside lay a satellite phone, not a burner cell, but military-spec communications equipment that operated on secured frequencies. Next to it was a small case containing an unmarked medallion bearing an eagle insignia, along with a dog tag with no name, just a series of numbers and letters. She stared at these items for a long moment, her expression unreadable. 6 years she'd gone without touching them. 6 years of quiet rebuilding, of becoming Morgan Reynolds' small-town motorcycle mechanic. She closed the compartment without removing anything, then the drawer locking it securely. Not yet. She needed more information before crossing that line. As she rose to leave, the shop's ancient radio crackled with static before settling on Creedence Clearwater Revival's Bad Moon Rising. Morgan paused, listening to John Fogerty's ominous warning about trouble on the way. The timing seemed too perfect to be coincidence. That night, Morgan stayed late at the shop working on the shovelhead engine with methodical precision. The repetitive mechanical tasks helped quiet her mind as she processed the day's developments and considered her options. The distant rumble of motorcycles reached her ears well before they appeared a sound distinct from passing traffic or the occasional rider. This was the coordinated approach of multiple bikes moving together with purpose. Morgan set down her tools and moved to the small side window, keeping to the shadows as she observed the street. A moment later, 8 motorcycles rounded the corner and slowed as they approached Reynolds Restoration. Their headlights cut through the desert night, illuminating the dust kicked up by their passage. They formed a V formation led by a massive road king with custom desert camo paint. The rider's leather cut bore a patch identifying him as the president of the Desert Vipers MC. Even from a distance, Morgan could see the military bearing in his posture, the disciplined control as he signaled the others to halt in front of her shop. For several long moments, they simply idled there, the combined rumble of their engines vibrating through the building's foundations. No attempts to enter, no shouting or vandalism, just a clear, deliberate show of presence. The message was unmistakable. We know where you are. We're watching. We can come anytime. Morgan remained motionless in the shadows. Her breathing controlled her mind, calculating distances, angles, potential scenarios. Old training reasserting itself without conscious effort. After precisely 3 minutes, the lead rider raised his fist in a military-style signal. The formation tightened and accelerated away in perfect synchronization, their taillights disappearing around the corner. Morgan waited 5 more minutes before moving, ensuring they were truly gone and not circling back. Then she returned to the office and unlocked the bottom drawer once more. This time she removed the satellite phone and powered it on. The device required a complex authentication sequence thumbprint, followed by an 8-digit code followed by a verbal passphrase. Morgan completed each step from muscle memory, though she hadn't touched the device in years. A green light indicated a secure connection established. She hesitated only briefly before dialing a number she'd memorized long ago and never written down. It rang 3 times before a male voice answered, gruff and cautious. Authentication, the voice demanded. Echo Sierra 793, Morgan responded, her voice dropping to a lower register, all traces of her casual southwestern drawl vanishing. Phoenix Protocol. A pause then, Jesus Christ. Nighthawk. It's me, Colonel. 6 years of silence, and now you're using emergency protocols. The voice lost its official edge, revealing genuine concern. What's happened? Desert Vipers Motorcycle Club, led by a man calling himself Victor Venom Keller. They've established territory in my area, and they're showing unusual interest in my operation. Keller, the name clearly registered. Description: 6'2" military build, salt and pepper, high and tight, burn scars, left side of neck. A sharp intake of breath. Morgan listened carefully. If it's who I think it is, this isn't random. Secure your position and prepare for extraction. I can have a team. No, Morgan cut him off. No extraction. This is my home now. I just need information. Who is he and what might he want with me? Silence stretched between them before the colonel responded. Victor Keller was Delta Force, specialized in asset elimination. Went off grid after Desert Storm. There were rumors he'd gone private sector, then criminal. If he's there and he's interested in you specifically, he might know who I am, Morgan finished the thought. Or he's there for reasons entirely unrelated to your past, the colonel countered. But that's not a chance I'd recommend taking. Morgan glanced at the security monitor, showing the empty street outside. I need to know what I'm dealing with. Can you send me his file? Not over this channel, but I can have a package delivered, 3 days maximum. Make it 2. Morgan, the colonel's voice softened. You got out, you built something, and are you sure you don't want to walk away? We can set you up somewhere new. Morgan's gaze drifted to the wall of her office, where photographs chronicled the growth of Reynolds Restoration, the grand opening ribbon cutting, Danny's first day as her apprentice, Earl and Martha, at the shop's 3rd anniversary celebration. I'm done running, she said quietly. Whatever this is, I'll handle it here. After ending the call, Morgan powered down the satellite phone and returned it to its hiding place. She moved through the darkened shop to the back storeroom, where a small cot stood ready for nights when she worked too late to drive home. But sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. Instead, she reached beneath the cot and removed a loose floorboard, revealing a waterproof case. Inside lay a Kimber 1911 .45 caliber pistol, 3 magazines, and a K-bar combat knife, insurance she'd hoped never to need. Morgan checked each item methodically, the movements automatic after years of training. The pistol's weight felt familiar in her hand, too familiar, like greeting an old friend she'd hoped never to see again. She returned the weapons to their hiding place, but left the floorboard loose for quicker access. Then she stretched out on the cot, fully clothed, and closed her eyes, knowing sleep would be fitful at best. Outside, the desert night enveloped Thunder Valley in darkness, broken only by the occasional passing headlight and the neon glow of signs along the old highway. In Martha's diner across the street, the lights had gone dark hours ago, the day's troubles temporarily set aside. But as Morgan drifted into restless sleep, 8 motorcycles circled the outskirts of town, their riders communicating through military-style hand signals, mapping entrances and exits, identifying key locations. Thunder Valley had enjoyed decades of relative peace. That peace was about to end. The desert dawn broke harsh and unforgiving over Thunder Valley, bathing Reynolds Restoration in golden light that did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in Morgan's bones. She'd managed perhaps 3 hours of fitful sleep on the cot in her back room, dreams filled with fragments of a past she'd spent years burying sand and blood, and the static-filled voices of comrades long gone. The shop wouldn't officially open for another hour, but Morgan was already at her workbench, methodically disassembling a carburetor with the radio tuned low to a classic rock station playing Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms. The familiar task helped center her thoughts as she considered her options. The colonel's package wouldn't arrive for at least another day, leaving her to navigate the immediate threat with limited intelligence. She heard the motorcycles before she saw them, a coordinated approach of multiple engines, their distinctive rumble announcing the Desert Viper's arrival with deliberate intimidation. Morgan didn't look up from her work, though her right hand casually shifted closer to the heavy wrench lying on the bench beside her. 6 bikes pulled into the gravel lot, kicking up dust clouds that drifted through the open garage bay. They parked in a perfect arrowhead formation, the point position occupied by a massive Road King with desert camouflage paint. The precision of their arrival spoke of military training. This wasn't the chaotic approach of common thugs. The riders dismounted in unison, removing helmets to reveal hard eyes scanning the property with tactical assessment. At their center stood Victor Venom Keller, his weathered face set in a mask of calculated neutrality as he led his men toward the garage entrance. Morgan counted the seconds of their approach, gauging distances, cataloging weapons visible beneath leather cuts. 5 men following Victor, all moved with the distinctive gait of combat veterans. 2 favored their right side's slightly old injuries. 1 wore a sidearm beneath his vest, poorly concealed. She waited until they reached the entrance before acknowledging their presence, setting down her tools with deliberate calm and turning to face them. "Shop doesn't open till 8, she said evenly, wiping her hands on a rag. "But I'm guessing you are not here for an oil change." Victor stepped forward, his posture relaxed yet commanding the stance of a man accustomed to authority. His eyes cold and assessing, scanned the shop before settling on Morgan with uncomfortable intensity. "Reynolds Restoration," he said, voice graveled by years of desert dust and cigarettes. "Heard you're the best Harley mechanic in 3 counties." "I manage," Morgan replied, her tone professionally detached. Victor approached the partially disassembled Softail in the corner, running calloused fingers along the frame with the appreciation of a true enthusiast. "Beautiful machine. 89 FXSTC if I'm not mistaken." Morgan nodded, surprised by his accurate identification. Most people couldn't distinguish between Softail models at a glance. "Though I notice you have adjusted the carburetor with the mixture screw 2 turns out." Victor continued, bending to examine the engine. "Old school. Most mechanics these days would have gone 1 3/4 for these Evolution engines." The casual display of technical knowledge was deliberate, establishing credibility, while subtly challenging her expertise. It was a tactic Morgan recognized from military interrogations, establish common ground before applying pressure. "2 turns gives better throttle response in high desert elevation," she replied. "Runs a bit rich at idle, but more reliable on the highway." Victor straightened, a smile not reaching his eyes. "A woman who knows her carburetors. Impressive." Before Morgan could respond, Mike Crusher Davis moved toward her toolbox, his massive frame dwarfing the workbench. With deliberate casualness, he bumped against the shelf, sending a container of 20W50 motorcycle oil crashing to the floor. Dark fluid spread across the concrete in a slick black pool. Oops, he said, not bothering to mask his satisfaction as the oil seeped toward Morgan's boots. Looks like you got yourself a mess, sweetheart. Better get that cleaned up. His meaning was clear, an assertion of dominance, a test of her reaction to blatant disrespect. Clumsy hands don't belong in a machine shop, Morgan responded, her voice ice cold despite the desert heat. Someone might get hurt. A tense silence followed as she maintained eye contact with Davis, neither willing to look away first. Finally, Victor broke the standoff with a sharp laugh. Apologies for my associate's enthusiasm, he said, placing a restraining hand on Davis's shoulder. We're eager to discuss business and sometimes forget our manners. Morgan moved unhurriedly to retrieve a shop rag, kneeling to contain the spreading oil. Every movement was measured, giving no indication of the calculations running behind her eyes, a distance to nearest exit, improvised weapons within reach. Response time if the situation escalated. What kind of business? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Victor paced the shop with studied casualness, examining the vintage posters and memorabilia as if genuinely interested. Thunder Valley's changing, Ms. Reynolds. Economic opportunities expanding. New players entering the market. Seems pretty much the same to me, Morgan countered, continuing to clean the spill while keeping the men in her peripheral vision. That's because you haven't been properly integrated into the new security arrangements. Victor stopped before a glass case displaying antique Harley parts. Small businesses are vulnerable these days. Break-ins, vandalism, supply chain, disruptions. Morgan stood, tossing the oil-soaked rag into a metal waste bin. I handle my own security just fine. Admirable, Victor nodded, but ultimately impractical. Our organization offers comprehensive protection services to valued local establishments. Martha's Diner has already recognized the wisdom of our arrangement. The mention of Martha, the implied threat, caused a dangerous flash in Morgan's eyes before she controlled her expression. For a modest weekly contribution, Victor continued, we ensure nothing unfortunate happens to your business or clientele. And how much would this modest contribution be? Morgan asked. For an operation like yours, specialized clientele, valuable inventory, I'd say $800 a week would be appropriate. Victor delivered the extortionate figure with a businessman's confidence. Higher than standard rate, but then you're not a standard mechanic. That's more than my monthly mortgage, Morgan replied evenly. Victor spread his hands in a gesture of mock helplessness. Quality protection comes at a premium, especially for a woman alone in this business. Some might view your situation as particularly vulnerable. The veiled threat hung in the air between them, emphasized by the way Davis and the others subtly shifted their positions, now blocking the main exit. Morgan's response was measured, her southwestern drawl more pronounced than usual. I appreciate the concern for my welfare, but I'll have to decline. As you can see, she gestured around the shop. This is a small operation. I can't afford that kind of overhead. Victor's expression hardened, the pretense of civility evaporating. I don't think you understand, Ms. Reynolds. This isn't an optional service. He picked up a precision torque wrench from her workbench, examining it with exaggerated interest. Beautiful tools you have. Would be a shame if something happened to them. He set the wrench down with unnecessary force. Or to that vintage panhead you're restoring in the back. Accidents happen so easily in a mechanical environment. Morgan's hand moved instinctively toward a nearby crescent wrench as Victor approached her workbench. The movement was subtle but caught Victor's trained eye. He paused, reassessing a new curiosity entering his gaze. Interesting reflexes for a mechanic, he observed quietly. Morgan forced herself to relax her posture, but it was too late. She'd revealed something, a trained response that didn't align with her cover story. Victor stepped closer, invading her personal space in a calculated intimidation tactic. As Morgan shifted position, adjusting her stance to maintain balance, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of a small tattoo on her inner wrist. It was mostly concealed, but a fragment was visible, the stylized outline of an eagle's wing with a numeric code beneath it. Victor's eyes locked on the partial tattoo, and something changed in his expression. Recognition mixed with disbelief, followed by a calculating reassessment. He stepped back slowly as if seeing Morgan for the first time. We'll be back tomorrow for your first payment, he said, his tone now carrying an undertone of genuine curiosity. I suggest you have it ready. He signaled his men with a subtle hand gesture, another military tell, and they filed out of the shop with the same disciplined coordination with which they'd arrived. Morgan remained motionless until the last motorcycle roared away, then immediately moved to secure the garage door. Her hands were steady as she locked up, but her mind raced. Victor had recognized something, either her reflexes or the partial tattoo. Either way, her carefully constructed identity had just developed a dangerous crack. The moment the Desert Vipers cleared the property, Morgan moved with swift efficiency, drawing the blinds and securing all entrances. She returned to the back room and retrieved the satellite phone, but hesitated before making the call. If Victor's recognition went beyond mere suspicion, using official channels might accelerate the collapse of her cover. Instead, she knelt and pried up the loose floorboard, removing not just the weapons case, but a second, smaller waterproof container hidden beneath it. Inside lay identity documents under various names, emergency cash in multiple currencies, and a thumb drive in a specialized protective case. Morgan connected the drive to a heavily modified laptop that had never touched the internet, a standalone system with military-grade encryption. The files contained contingency plans for various compromise scenarios developed years ago when she'd first gone underground. But before she could implement any escape protocol, she needed to understand exactly what she was facing. If Victor Keller was who she suspected, if he had connections to her past running, might trigger a wider manhunt. Better to gather intelligence first. After 15 minutes of reviewing her options, Morgan returned everything to its hiding place, except for the tracking devices and a combat knife, which she concealed beneath her clothing. Then she exited through a rear door, disguised as part of the storage room wall, an escape route she'd built when first purchasing the property. The Arizona sun was blinding after the dimness of the shop, the heat already intense despite the early hour. Morgan moved through back alleys and service roads, avoiding the main street where the Desert Vipers might have left observers. Years of training allowed her to navigate without attracting attention, just another local going about their business. She reached the sheriff's office 20 minutes later, entering through the side door reserved for department personnel. Cooper looked up from his desk, surprise quickly giving way to concern at her unannounced arrival. "Morgan, everything okay?" She closed the door behind her, ensuring privacy before responding. "The Desert Vipers paid me a visit this morning. $800 a week for protection." Cooper's expression darkened. "Damn, they're escalating faster than I thought." He rubbed his jaw, the stubble evidence of a long night. "What did you tell them?" "I declined their generous offer," Morgan said dryly. "They're coming back tomorrow, expecting payment." Cooper sighed, gesturing for her to take a seat. "They've hit every business on Main Street now. Martha called earlier. They've doubled her rate after she initially refused." "I need to know more about them, James," Morgan said, using the sheriff's first name, a rarity that underscored the seriousness of the situation. "Particularly Victor Keller." Cooper raised an eyebrow at her intensity but didn't question it. He pulled a file from his desk drawer and spread several photographs across the surface. Victor Keller, age 48, former military, though his service record has more black ink than text. After discharge, he worked for several private military contractors in Afghanistan and Iraq. Cooper tapped a surveillance photo showing Keller meeting with men in expensive suits. Then he disappeared for about 3 years, resurfaced 2 years ago with the Desert Vipers already established as their president. Morgan studied the photographs, searching for details that might confirm her suspicions. These motorcycle clubs often form around veterans, right? Especially after Desert Storm. Cooper nodded, leaning back in his chair. "It was a pattern we saw nationwide. Men came back from the Gulf with specialized training and combat experience, but found civilian life lacking. VA was overwhelmed, PTSD went untreated, and the camaraderie of military service was suddenly gone." He flipped through additional photos showing Desert Vipers members. Most of these guys served in some capacity. Davis was Marine Force Recon before a dishonorable discharge. Reynolds, no relation to you, was Army Rangers. Thompson was Navy, I think. "They're not just running protection rackets," Morgan stated rather than asked. Cooper hesitated, glancing toward the closed door before continuing in a lower voice. "Intelligence suggests they're moving significant quantities of methamphetamine and heroin along the I-40 corridor. But that's not what worries me most." He pulled out another file, this one marked with federal case numbers. We've received reports linking them to human trafficking operations. Young women disappearing from truck stops border towns. DEA and FBI are building cases, but jurisdiction issues and limited manpower have slowed progress. And local law enforcement, Morgan asked, already knowing the answer. Cooper's frustration was evident. 3 deputies covering nearly 10,000 square miles. We're outmanned, outgunned, and they know it. Morgan digested this information, connecting it with her emerging suspicions about Victor's true identity. Has Keller ever mentioned military intelligence or special operations groups during your surveillance? The question was specific enough to make Cooper study her with renewed interest. Not that I recall. Why, just trying to understand what we're dealing with. Morgan deflected smoothly. Cooper seemed unconvinced, but continued. What I can tell you is they have established a base of operations at the old Carson Ranch, about 15 miles outside town. Former hunting lodge converted to their clubhouse. Remote defensible position, clear sight lines for hundreds of yards. Morgan recognized the tactical advantages of such a location. Any idea what they're planning next? Word is they're expecting a major shipment this weekend. Based on increased activity and some chatter, we've picked up something big is coming in. Cooper lowered his voice further. They've been clearing out the old airplane hangar at the ranch, installing new security systems. This was valuable intelligence, giving Morgan a time frame to work with. Whatever Victor's connection to her past might be, it appeared he had immediate operational concerns that took priority. That might buy her the time she needed to prepare. Morgan, Cooper said, his tone shifting from professional to personal. I need to ask, is there something you're not telling me? The way you're approaching this, it's not typical civilian reaction. Morgan met his gaze steadily. I've dealt with intimidation before, James. In my line of work, you learn to handle difficult customers. It wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. Cooper studied her for a long moment before closing the files. Whatever's going on, be careful. These aren't just weekend warriors playing biker gang. They're organized, disciplined, and they don't leave witnesses. As Morgan left the sheriff's office, she felt Cooper's eyes following her. His suspicions now added to the growing list of complications she faced. Time was running out on the life she'd built in Thunder Valley. Morgan spent the afternoon implementing immediate security upgrades to her shop and home, installing motion sensors at key access points, and positioning improvised defensive measures that would buy her time in case of attack. The colonel's package wouldn't arrive until tomorrow, at the earliest, leaving her with limited resources beyond her own training and the equipment she'd maintained in secret. As dusk approached, she made a decision. If Victor Keller had recognized her tattoo, if he knew about Ghost Protocol, she needed confirmation before deciding her next move. Intelligence gathering was the priority, which meant surveillance of the Desert Vipers compound. After closing the shop, Morgan drove her weathered Ford F-150 to a secluded location 3 miles from town, where she'd hidden a storage container beneath a false rock formation years earlier, one of several emergency caches she'd established upon arriving in Thunder Valley. From it, she retrieved a backpack containing night vision equipment, communications gear, and non-lethal defensive tools that couldn't be traced back to her if discovered. The Carson Ranch sat in a valley surrounded by red rock formations, providing natural vantage points for surveillance. Morgan approached on foot from the east, using the rugged terrain for cover as she advanced. The desert night had cooled significantly, stars blazing overhead in the clear sky as she established a position on a ridge overlooking the compound. Through her night vision monocular, she observed the Desert Vipers operation with professional assessment. The main building, a converted hunting lodge, showed signs of significant security upgrades, motion sensors, reinforced doors, and what appeared to be a communications array on the roof. Sentries patrolled the perimeter at irregular intervals, a tactic that indicated professional security training rather than typical biker gang practices. The airplane hangar Cooper had mentioned stood separate from the main building, its massive doors currently open to reveal a flurry of activity inside. Men moved crates and equipment with military efficiency, preparing for whatever shipment was expected over the weekend. Morgan adjusted her position slightly, activating a directional microphone to capture conversations when guards passed nearby. For over an hour, she gathered only fragments of operational chatter, shift changes, perimeter reports, routine communications. Then as midnight approached, vehicle headlights appeared on the distant access road. A black SUV with government plates approached the compound, passing through security, with minimal verification, suggesting the visitor was expected and authorized. Morgan zoomed in as the vehicle parked, and its occupant emerged a man in his 60s wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. Victor Keller emerged from the main building to greet him, the two men shaking hands with a familiarity of long association before disappearing inside. 20 minutes of silent observation followed before Morgan detected movement on the lodge's side deck. Victor and his visitor had emerged for a private conversation away from others. She adjusted the directional microphone, filtering out ambient noise to focus on their voices. "Shipment arrives Saturday at 0200, the older man was saying. 3 trucks coming in from the south route. Your payment will be transferred upon confirmation of delivery." "And the special cargo?" Victor asked. "Separate vehicle arriving 1 hour later. Handle with extreme care, these assets are irreplaceable." The euphemism was clear. They weren't discussing drugs or weapons, but people. Human trafficking, just as Cooper had suspected. "Any progress on the other matter?" the older man asked, his voice dropping lower. Victor's response sent a chill through Morgan, despite the desert night's warmth. "Potentially. There's a mechanic in Thunder Valley with skills that don't match her background. And a tattoo I found interesting." "Ghost protocol." The visitor's voice sharpened with sudden intensity. "Can't confirm yet. It was partially concealed, but the eagle wing design is distinctive. If it's her, if it's actually Nighthawk, this changes everything. The operation becomes secondary." Morgan's blood went cold. Nighthawk. Her operational code name from a life she'd left behind. A name that should have died in the desert 6 years ago along with the rest of her team. "I need confirmation before we move," Victor continued. "If she's Ghost Protocol, she won't be easy to take. These women were trained beyond anything you've seen." "I'm well aware of their capabilities," the older man replied, an edge of bitterness in his tone. "I helped create the program, remember, before your team eliminated most of them." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The older man was Colonel Marcus Hendricks, not her colonel, but his counterpart in a rival intelligence division. The man who had advocated shutting down Ghost Protocol when the all-female Special Operations Unit proved too effective, threatening his traditional male-dominated programs. And Victor Keller had been part of the kill team sent to eliminate them during a mission gone wrong in northern Iraq. The mission Morgan had barely survived, the one that had forced her into hiding when she realized the attack had come from within their own government. "If it's Nighthawk," Hendricks continued, "secure her alive if possible. She possesses intelligence that could compromise operations still in progress. But if capture isn't viable..." "Understood," Victor replied. "We'll move on the garage tomorrow night after the town quiets down." Morgan had heard enough. She carefully withdrew from her position, leaving no trace of her presence as she melted into the desert landscape. Her mind processed the intelligence with cold efficiency, separating emotion from operational planning. Victor hadn't just recognized her, he'd identified her as a Ghost Protocol operative. Worse, he was working with Hendricks, the man who had orchestrated the betrayal that killed her team. And they were planning to move against her tomorrow night after the expected payment deadline. One thing was certain: running was no longer an option. If she disappeared now, they would simply expand their search, potentially endangering anyone connected to her, Earl, Danny, Martha. And beyond the personal connections, there was the matter of the special cargo arriving Saturday. Human lives hanging in the balance. Morgan Reynolds, small-town motorcycle mechanic, had reached the end of her road. It was time for Nighthawk to reemerge. Dawn was breaking as Morgan returned to her shop, moving through the rear entrance to avoid being seen. She'd spent the night implementing the first phase of her countermeasures, placing surveillance devices at strategic locations around town and establishing rally points for what would come next. She was preparing coffee when a frantic knocking at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Through the security monitor, she saw Danny Wilson, his face bruised and clothing disheveled. Morgan quickly disabled the security system and let him in. "Danny, what happened?" She guided the teenager to a chair, noting the split lip and rapidly swelling eye. "They jumped me at the gas station," Danny explained, wincing as Morgan examined his injuries. "3 of them Desert Vipers. Said it was a message for you." Morgan's expression hardened as she retrieved a first aid kit from beneath the counter. "Tell me everything? Don't leave anything out." Danny described how he'd stopped for gas on his way to the shop, only to be surrounded by 3 Vipers who demanded he remind his boss about tomorrow's payment. When Danny had responded with teenage bravado, they dragged him behind the building for what they called an attitude adjustment. Grandpa Earl saw it happening from across the street, Danny continued. He came over with his walking stick, told them to leave me alone. Morgan paused in cleaning Danny's cuts. Earl confronted them alone. Danny nodded, said he was the former sheriff and they were committing assault on his watch. One of them, big guy with a shaved head, just laughed and shoved him. Grandpa fell pretty hard. Is Earl okay? Morgan's voice remained calm, but her knuckles whitened around the antiseptic bottle. I think so. Mrs. Jenkins from the diner helped him up and took him inside. I came straight here to warn you. Morgan finished treating Danny's injuries in silence, her mind calculating this new escalation. Using Danny as a message was tactical, demonstrating their willingness to target those close to her while avoiding direct confrontation until they were ready. Danny, I want you to go to Martha's diner and stay with your grandfather. Don't leave there until I come for you. Understand? The teenager started to protest, but stopped at the expression on Morgan's face, one he'd never seen before. This wasn't the patient mentor who taught him about carburetors and timing chains. This was someone else entirely. What are you going to do? He asked. Fix the problem, Morgan replied simply. After Danny left, Morgan moved quickly to the hidden compartment beneath her office floor, retrieving the satellite phone. This time, she didn't hesitate before making the call. Phoenix protocol activated, she said when the familiar voice answered. I need the package delivered today, and I need backup. Falcon Echo and Delta if they're available. Nighthawk? The colonel sounded genuinely shocked. What's happened? Hendricks found me. He's working with Victor Keller, the operative who led the team that hit us in Mosul. A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Marcus Hendricks is supposed to be retired under intelligence community monitoring. Well, he's running operations with a criminal motorcycle gang in Arizona trafficking humans and planning to eliminate the Last Ghost Protocol survivor. Morgan replied grimly. They're moving against me tomorrow night, and they've already started targeting civilians connected to me. Understood. Package is already en route, estimated arrival, 1400 hours your location. Falcon is unavailable, congressional testimony. Echo and Delta can deploy within 6 hours. Morgan calculated the timeline against what she knew of the Viper's plans. Have them come in separately, civilian cover, standard recognition protocols. And Colonel, we're going to need extraction capability for multiple civilian assets. Authorized, came the immediate response. Morgan, I'm sorry it's come to this. We thought you were safe. So did I, Morgan replied, ending the call. She spent the next hour gathering intelligence from her surveillance network, confirming the Desert Vipers were indeed preparing for both the confrontation with her and the mysterious shipment arriving Saturday. Two separate operations now converging because of her discovered identity. At 10 o'clock, she drove to Martha's diner, entering through the kitchen to avoid being seen from the street. She found Earl seated in a back booth, a butterfly bandage across his temple, and his right arm in a makeshift sling. Danny sat beside him while Martha hovered nearby with fresh coffee and undisguised concern. You've looked better, old man, Morgan said softly, sliding into the booth across from them. Earl managed a pained smile. Should see the other guy. He doesn't have a scratch on him, and you know it, Martha scolded, but her voice held affection beneath the worry. Morgan assessed Earl's injuries with a practiced eye, painful but not serious. The emotional impact of being physically overpowered, however, clearly weighed on the former lawman's pride. I'm sorry they targeted you, Morgan said. Both of you. It's because of me. Earl shook his head. It's because they're predators who think they can take whatever they want. Been seeing their kind my whole career, just wearing different colors. Martha placed a hand on Morgan's shoulder. Cooper came by earlier, said the Vipers have been pressuring every business in town, not just yours. But they went after Danny and Earl specifically to send me a message, Morgan replied. And that changes things. Earl studied her face with shrewd assessment. You've got that look, Morgan, the one that says you're about to do something that can't be undone. She met his gaze steadily. Some things shouldn't remain undone. You're not just a mechanic, are you? Earl asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. After 6 years of careful evasion of half-truths and redirected conversations, Morgan made a decision. These people had become her family. They deserved some measure of truth. No, she admitted simply. I'm not. Earl nodded slowly as if confirming a long-held suspicion. Military something like that. Figured as much that day you caught the cabinet. No ordinary person moves like that. Earl leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. Whatever you were, whatever you are, I'm guessing it's the kind of background that could handle a situation like this. Morgan remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Good, Earl said firmly, because these boys need to be taught a lesson about coming into our town and hurting our people. The possessive plural wasn't lost on Morgan, our town, our people. After 6 years, she'd become one of them despite her secrets. I need you to trust me, she said finally. Things are going to happen, and I need you all to follow my instructions exactly. No questions, no deviations. Like what kind of things? Danny asked, speaking up for the first time. Like you and Earl staying at Martha's tonight away from your usual locations. Like preparing for the possibility that you might need to leave town for a while. Martha's eyes widened. Leave town, Morgan? What are you planning? The less you know right now, the better, Morgan replied. But I promise you this, the Desert Vipers won't be threatening anyone in Thunder Valley after this weekend. Earl studied her with the experienced assessment of a career lawman. You going to tell Cooper about whatever you're planning? Morgan shook her head. Cooper operates within the law. What needs to happen here doesn't. A long silence followed this statement, broken finally by Earl's soft chuckle. Knew there was a reason I liked you from day one, Reynolds. As Morgan prepared to leave, Earl caught her arm with his good hand. Whatever you were before, whoever you were, it doesn't change who you are to us now. Remember that. The simple acceptance in his eyes nearly broke through Morgan's carefully maintained composure. She squeezed his hand, once unable to speak, then slipped out through the kitchen exit. As she crossed the back alley, Morgan spotted a familiar black Dodge Ram turning onto Main Street Desert Vipers, conducting surveillance tracking her movements. The game had changed now, both sides maneuvering toward inevitable confrontation. By mid-afternoon, a nondescript delivery truck arrived at Reynolds Restoration. The driver, a middle-aged man with the weathered look of a career courier, required Morgan's thumbprint and retinal scan on a disguised scanner before handing over a seemingly ordinary package and departing without a word. Inside her office, Morgan opened the secure container to find exactly what she'd requested: tactical equipment, specialized weapons with untraceable provenance, advanced surveillance technology, and most importantly, a comprehensive intelligence file on Victor Keller and Marcus Hendricks, their operational history-known associates and documented activities since her team had been ambushed in Mosul. The file confirmed her worst suspicions. Victor Keller had indeed led the strike team that eliminated most of Ghost Protocol, a classified female-only special operations unit created to access environments and assets impossible for male operatives to reach in certain cultural contexts. The program had been devastatingly effective until internal political struggles led to its betrayal from within. Colonel Marcus Hendricks had orchestrated the program's destruction, viewing it as a threat to traditional special operations hierarchies. After failing to shut it down through official channels, he'd arranged the ambush that killed Morgan's teammates under the cover of a routine intelligence gathering mission in northern Iraq. Morgan had survived only through luck and the sacrifice of her team leader, who'd forced her onto an extraction helicopter moments before the position was overrun. Upon returning to base, Morgan had discovered the truth: the attack had been sanctioned by elements within their own government. With her colonel's help, she disappeared, her death officially recorded alongside her teammates. For 6 years, she'd lived as Morgan Reynolds, building a new identity far from the shadows of her former life. Now that life had found her, and the architect of her team's destruction was operating less than 20 miles from the home she'd created. More disturbing still were the intelligence reports detailing Hendricks' current operation, a black market human trafficking network specializing in transporting high-value assets across borders using former intelligence community resources. The special cargo mentioned in his conversation with Victor wasn't just generic human trafficking. It was likely specific individuals being transported against their will for intelligence purposes. Morgan was still processing this information when her security system alerted her to an arrival, a woman in her early 40s with short blonde hair driving a rental car with California plates. Morgan checked the security feed and felt a surge of emotion she rarely permitted herself. Echo had arrived. Samantha Echo Williams had been Ghost Protocol's communications specialist, believed dead in the Mosul ambush. Clearly, Morgan wasn't the only survivor who'd gone underground with their colonel's help. Morgan disabled the security system to allow Echo entry through the rear door. When they came face to face for the first time in 6 years, neither woman spoke immediately. Then Echo stepped forward and embraced Morgan tightly. "Thought you were dead," Echo said when they finally separated. "Likewise," Morgan replied. "Delta. On her way. Separate transport for security. She'll be here by nightfall." The knowledge that Rebecca Delta Patel, their team's explosives and infiltration expert, had also survived sent another wave of emotion through Morgan. 3 survivors from a team of 7. Not as complete a victory as Hendricks had believed. "Colonel briefed me on the drive over," Echo said, surveying the shop with professional assessment. "Victor Keller and Marcus Hendricks. The bastards responsible for Mosul operating right in your backyard. Universe has a twisted sense of humor. They're running human trafficking through here," Morgan explained, leading Echo to the office where the intelligence files were spread out. "But now that they have identified me, I've become the priority target." Echo studied the surveillance photos Morgan had taken. The compound has good defensive positioning, multiple escape routes, professional security setup, and at least 15 operators with military or paramilitary training, Morgan added, plus whatever assets Hendricks brings in when the shipment arrives Saturday. "So we're outnumbered, outgunned, and operating without official sanction against a former intelligence officer with black budget resources," Echo summarized, "just like old times." Despite everything, Morgan found herself smiling. The familiar dynamic of operational planning with a trusted teammate felt like stepping back into a well-worn pair of boots. "They're planning to move against me tomorrow night," Morgan explained. "But they've accelerated their timeline by targeting people connected to me. They've already assaulted a 16-year-old boy and an elderly man to send a message." Echo's expression hardened. "Using civilians as leverage. Hendricks always was a classy guy. We need to get my people to safety before engaging," Morgan continued. "Earl Danny Martha, possibly Sheriff Cooper, though he's a complication I'm still assessing. Delta will handle extraction when she arrives. Her cover identity has diplomatic credentials. She can move civilians across state lines without questions." Echo pointed to the compound layout. "Primary target, Hendricks in the human trafficking operation," Morgan replied without hesitation. "Victor is a secondary objective, dangerous, but ultimately just a weapon Hendricks is wielding." They spent the next hour developing preliminary infiltration plans, identifying approach vectors, and potential exfiltration routes. The shop's radio played classic rock in the background, Bruce Springsteen's "Darkness on the Edge of Town," providing an oddly appropriate soundtrack to their preparations. As evening approached, Morgan received another security alert, a Desert Viper's motorcycle slowly circling the block, conducting obvious surveillance. They were establishing patterns, identifying routines, preparing for tomorrow night's planned operation. "They're not being subtle," Echo observed. "They don't think they need to be," Morgan replied. "As far as they know, I'm just a mechanic who happened to have military background, not a Ghost Protocol operative preparing counteroffensive measures." Echo's response was interrupted by the shop phone ringing, an unusual occurrence after business hours. Morgan checked the caller ID, Martha's Diner. "Martha, everything okay?" Morgan answered, instantly alert. Martha's voice came through tight with tension. "Morgan, they're here. 4 of them, including that big one, Davis. They're asking questions about you being aggressive with customers." Morgan's mind raced, calculating response options. "Is Earl there?" "Yes, with Danny. They're in the back booth. The bikers haven't noticed them yet, but it's only a matter of time. Keep them out of sight. I'm on my way." Morgan hung up and turned to Echo. "Change of plans. Desert Vipers are at the diner threatening Martha. Earl and Danny are there too." Echo was already moving, retrieving a compact pistol from her ankle holster. "Tactical approach. No firearms unless absolutely necessary," Morgan decided. "Too many civilians, too public. Hand-to-hand only, non-lethal takedowns." They exited through the rear door, using the alley network to approach Martha's Diner from behind. Through the kitchen window, they could see Martha nervously serving coffee to 4 Desert Vipers seated at the counter, while Earl and Danny remained hidden in a rear booth, tension evident in their postures. Mike Crusher Davis was speaking loudly enough to be heard through the glass. "Just saying, a woman like that running a shop alone, she must have protection from someone. Sheriff, maybe? They seem awful friendly. Another Viper laughed. Maybe she provides special services for the local law enforcement. Martha's face flushed with anger as she refilled their cups. Morgan Reynolds is the best mechanic in the state. She doesn't need to provide anything but her skills with engines. Davis grabbed Martha's wrist coffee pot and all. Loyal, I like that, but loyalty to the wrong person can be dangerous in changing times. From their position outside, Morgan saw Earl begin to rise from the booth, his face darkening with protective anger despite his injuries. Danny grabbed his grandfather's arm, trying to restrain him. Time to intervene, Morgan murmured to Echo. I'll take point. You circle around to the front entrance to cut off retreat. Echo nodded and disappeared around the building, while Morgan entered through the kitchen door, signaling the startled cook to remain silent. She moved through the swinging doors into the main dining area with casual confidence, as if she'd just stopped by for dinner rather than intervention. Evening, Martha, she called, drawing all eyes to her. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible. The four Vipers turned to stare, Davis still gripping Martha's wrist. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by a predatory smile. Well, look who it is. We were just talking about you, Ms. Reynolds. He released Martha with exaggerated politeness. Seems like fate running into you here. Morgan maintained a relaxed posture as she approached the counter, positioning herself between the bikers and the booth, where Earl and Danny watched with wide eyes. Martha, why don't you check on that pie in the oven? Morgan suggested calmly. I think it might be burning. Martha hesitated only briefly before understanding Morgan's intent to remove her from potential danger. She retreated to the kitchen, shooting a worried glance over her shoulder. The remaining customers, an elderly couple and a truck driver, sensed the tension and quietly paid their bills, edging toward the exit where Echo now stood, seemingly engrossed in a menu, but effectively blocking the doorway. You boys are a long way from your clubhouse, Morgan observed, leaning against the counter with calculated nonchalance. Diner's about to close. Maybe you should head back before it gets dark. Davis stood, using his superior height to loom over her. Actually, we came with a message from Victor. He's reconsidered the payment schedule. Wants the first installment tonight instead of tomorrow. Is that right? Morgan's voice remained level, but her stance shifted subtly. Weight balance, feet position for optimal response. And if I'm not feeling particularly generous tonight, then things get unpleasant, Davis replied, cracking his knuckles with theatrical menace. Starting with this quaint little diner. Be a shame if there was a grease fire in the kitchen. These old buildings burn so easily. At the mention of threatening the diner, Morgan saw Earl fully rise from the booth behind Davis, his face set in determination despite his injured arm. The movement caught the attention of one of the other Vipers, who nudged Davis. Well, well, if it isn't the retired sheriff, Davis sneered, turning to face Earl. Didn't learn your lesson this morning, old man. Earl stood his ground, chin raised with dignity, despite the butterfly bandage on his temple. In my day, men who threatened women and businesses got introduced to the inside of a jail cell. Your day is long gone, Grandpa, Davis laughed, taking a step toward Earl. It was the opening Morgan had been waiting for. With Davis's attention diverted, she moved a fluid sequence of motion honed through thousands of hours of training. Her hand clamped onto Davis's wrist, applying precise pressure to a nerve cluster, while her foot hooked behind his ankle. Before Davis registered what was happening, he found himself face down on the diner floor, arm twisted behind his back at a painful angle, Morgan's knee applying calculated pressure between his shoulder blades. What the One of the other Vipers began reaching inside his cut for what was almost certainly a weapon. Echo chose that moment to step away from the entrance, moving with the same fluid grace as Morgan. Two short strikes, one to the solar plexus, another to the nerve bundle at the base of the neck, and the second Viper collapsed, gasping for breath, his hand never reaching his weapon. The remaining two Vipers found themselves facing a situation that had deteriorated with shocking speed. They backed toward the exit, reaching for concealed weapons, but Echo and Morgan had closed the distance before they could draw. What followed was a brief, brutal demonstration of Ghost Protocol close quarters combat training. Morgan disabled the third Viper with a precise strike to the brachial plexus origin, temporarily paralyzing his right arm, followed by a sweeping kick that took his legs from under him. Echo handled the fourth with equal efficiency, a lightning-fast combination targeting pressure points that left the man conscious, but completely incapacitated, slumped against the diner's jukebox. Throughout the entire confrontation, which lasted less than 15 seconds, neither Morgan nor Echo appeared to exert themselves. Their movements were economical, precise, the hallmark of operators trained to eliminate threats with minimal energy expenditure and maximum effectiveness. Davis struggled beneath Morgan's restraining hold, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You're dead," he snarled. "You're all dead when Victor hears about this." Morgan increased pressure on his twisted arm, causing him to gasp in pain. "Here's a message for Victor," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register Earl and Danny had never heard before. "The woman he's looking for. She's not running. Tell him Nighthawk remembers Mosul." She applied additional pressure to a specific nerve point, and Davis's eyes rolled back as unconsciousness claimed him. The diner fell silent except for the soft moaning of the incapacitated vipers. Martha stood in the kitchen doorway, her expression a mixture of shock and awe. Earl and Danny remained frozen by their booths, staring at Morgan as if seeing her for the first time. Echo moved efficiently between the fallen vipers, securing them with zip ties produced from her jacket pocket. "4 minutes until they're reported missing," she said to Morgan. "We need to move." Morgan nodded, turning to Martha. "Close the diner, lock the doors. Then you, Earl, and Danny need to come with us. Pack only essentials. You'll be gone at least a week." Martha found her voice. "Morgan, what just happened?" "Who are you?" Morgan met her gaze steadily. "Someone who's not going to let them hurt you or anyone else in this town. That's all you need to know right now." Earl approached slowly, studying the efficiently restrained bikers with professional assessment. "Military, my ass," he muttered. "Special forces at minimum. Probably something that doesn't officially exist." Morgan didn't confirm or deny, turning instead to Echo. "Get them out through the back. I'll handle these 4. "What are you going to do with them?" Danny asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and newfound respect. Morgan's smile held no warmth. "Deliver a message." 20 minutes later, as darkness fully enveloped Thunder Valley, Sheriff Cooper received an anonymous call reporting a disturbance at the outlook point 5 miles outside town. When he arrived, he found 4 Desert Vipers members duct taped to the scenic viewpoint railing, each bearing a note pinned to their leather cuts that read simply, "Closed for business." At Reynolds Restoration, Morgan and Echo prepared for the arrival of their 3rd team member and the acceleration of their timetable. Victor would respond to the humiliation of his men with overwhelming force, abandoning the planned Friday night operation in favor of immediate retaliation. "You realized you've just started a war," Echo observed as they fortified the shop's defenses. Morgan checked the action on a matte black pistol before securing it in a holster at the small of her back. "They started it 6 years ago in Mosul. I'm just finally finishing it." As if in response to her words, the distant rumble of multiple motorcycles echoed through the desert night, growing steadily louder as they approached Thunder Valley. The Desert Vipers were coming in force, and Morgan Reynolds, or rather the operative known as Nighthawk, was ready to receive them. The roar of motorcycles echoed through Thunder Valley like distant thunder, growing steadily louder as the Desert Vipers approached Reynolds Restoration. Morgan stood in the darkened garage, her transformation from small-town mechanic to elite operative complete. Gone were the casual work clothes, replaced by tactical attire that allowed maximum mobility. The red bandana, her everyday trademark, remained tied around her neck, now serving as both identifier and connection to the life she'd built. "Delta's 5 minutes out," Echo reported, checking a secure communications device. "Martha, Earl, and Danny are secure at Extraction Point Charlie." Morgan nodded, mind-focused on the immediate tactical situation. After the diner incident, she'd moved her civilian friends to a Forest Service cabin 15 miles outside town, one of several emergency locations she'd established years earlier. They were safe for now, but everything hinged on neutralizing the threat permanently. "They're coming in hot," Morgan observed, monitoring the security feeds showing the approaching motorcycles. 20-plus riders, full tactical formation. Victor's bringing everything he has. The garage had undergone a remarkable transformation in the past hours. What had appeared to be a typical motorcycle repair shop now revealed its potential as a defensive stronghold. The hydraulic lift in the center, normally used to elevate motorcycles for repair, had been modified into a mechanical trap. Oil reservoirs were positioned to create hazardous surfaces when triggered. Tools had been strategically placed throughout the workspace, not just as potential weapons, but as part of elaborate defensive mechanisms. Almost feels like Damascus, Echo commented, checking the charge on a non-lethal shock device disguised as a common voltage tester. Morgan allowed herself a brief smile at the reference to a past operation. Better equipment this time, and we're calling the shots. A soft knock at the rear entrance signaled Delta's arrival. Morgan verified her identity through the security monitor before disabling the defensive measures to allow entry. Rebecca Delta Patel stepped inside looking nothing like a special operations expert. Dressed in business casual attire with her dark hair pulled back in a sensible bun, she projected the image of a mid-level corporate executive. Only her eyes sharp, assessing missing, nothing betrayed her true nature. Perimeter's hot, Delta reported without preamble. They've stationed men at all major intersections. Sheriff's office is under observation. They're isolating the target zone. The three women exchanged glances, the reality of their situation clear. Ghost Protocol had operated in hostile territory across the globe, but always with extraction plans, official support, and the protection of governmental deniability. Tonight they faced a small army with only their skills, Morgan's preparations, and whatever advantage surprise might provide. Civilians secured, Delta asked, already unpacking specialized equipment from a nondescript duffel bag. For now, Morgan confirmed, but Victor won't stop with me. Anyone connected will be considered collateral once he realizes who we are and what we know. Delta nodded grimly, unfolding building schematics Morgan had provided. The garage is defensible, but not indefinitely. We need to end this tonight before Hendricks realizes Victor's cover is blown and scrubs the entire operation. Agreed, Morgan said, leading them to the central planning area she'd established. Primary objective remains securing evidence of Hendricks' involvement in the human trafficking operation. Victor is secondary, but necessary to reach Hendricks. Echo gestured toward the surveillance monitors showing motorcycles approaching from multiple directions. They're not coming to negotiate. This is a termination team. Good, Morgan replied with cold precision, because we're not feeling particularly diplomatic either. As the three women completed final preparations, a loud pounding at the front door announced the Desert Viper's arrival. Victor's voice carried clearly through the night air. Morgan Reynolds, we know you're in there. Come out now and nobody else gets hurt. Morgan exchanged glances with her teammates, a silent confirmation passing between them. The Ghost Protocol survivors moved to their predetermined positions, activating communications equipment that linked them despite physical separation. Ready for visitors, Morgan asked over the secure channel. East side covered, Echo confirmed. Rear entrance secured, Delta added. Traps active. Morgan approached the main entrance, staying carefully to one side as she called back. The shop's closed, Victor, but I think you already know I'm not just a mechanic. A pause followed, then Victor's voice again closer to the door. Nighthawk, been a long time since Mosul. You were supposed to die with the others. Disappointed, Morgan's voice carried just the right mix of confidence and contempt. Just surprised. Ghost Protocol was officially terminated. All operators listed as killed in action. Morgan allowed herself a cold smile, though Victor couldn't see it. Apparently your team's efficiency was overrated. 3 of us survived. This revelation elicited muttered conversations outside Victor, conferring with his lieutenants, recalculating threat assessments based on this new information. 3 against 25, Victor finally responded. Poor odds even for Ghost Protocol. Depends on the 3, Morgan countered. But we don't have to do this, Victor. Walk away, tell Hendricks the operation's compromised. Victor's laugh held no humor. You know that's not an option. Hendricks wants you eliminated in any evidence you've gathered. Nothing personal, just tying up loose ends. It feels personal from where I'm standing. Morgan checked the security feeds one last time. Last chance, Victor. The Desert Vipers can ride away from this. Hendricks is the primary target, not you. Loyalty has its price, Victor replied. Sometimes that price is blood. The conversation ended with the sound of breaking glass, a diversionary attack on the side windows, while the main force prepared to breach the front entrance. Morgan moved smoothly away from the door, off-arm activating the first defensive measures with a remote trigger concealed in her palm. They're coming in, she announced over the comm. Commence Operation Payback. The Desert Vipers breached Reynolds' restoration with military precision, entering through multiple access points simultaneously. They moved in tactical formation, weapons ready, expecting resistance but confident in their superior numbers. What they didn't expect was the building itself to become their enemy. As the first team forced the front door, Morgan activated the shop's transformed defense systems. The overhead lights cut out instantly, plunging the interior into darkness, broken only by red emergency lighting that cast everything in blood-tinted shadows. Disorienting and psychological, the first layer of Morgan's carefully orchestrated response. The hydraulic lift in the center bay activated without warning, rising rapidly as three Vipers crossed it. The sudden movement unbalanced them, sending two crashing to the floor, while the third clung desperately to the rising platform. "Contact front," came Victor's calm voice from outside. "Sweep and clear, maintain discipline." Four more Vipers entered through a side window, using the darkness for cover as they advanced. They moved 5 steps before Delta triggered her first trap, a pressurized system that sprayed motor oil across the concrete floor. The four men instantly lost traction, their combat boots sliding uncontrollably on the slick surface. Two fell hard, weapons clattering away. The others grabbed desperately at nearby shelving, only to have it collapse under their weight, a load-bearing support strategically weakened earlier. Morgan's voice echoed through the shop's speaker system, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome to Reynolds Restoration, gentlemen. Today's special isn't an oil change." She paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the line that would later become legendary in Thunder Valley. "Today we're specializing in bone repair." From her elevated position on the mezzanine level, Morgan observed the chaotic scene below. Victor remained outside, directing the operation from a command position typical of his leadership style. She counted 15 Vipers inside now, with more attempting entry through the rear. "Delta status?" Morgan queried through her comm. "Rear breach in progress," came the calm response. "Four tangos attempting entry, countermeasures active." As if on cue, a series of sharp cracks followed by pained shouts emanated from the back of the shop. Delta had rigged the rear entrance with specialized shock plates, non-lethal but excruciating, delivering localized electrical charges through conductive flooring. Echo's voice joined the communications. "East side contained, 3 incapacitated, moving to secondary position." The tide was turning before the battle truly began. Morgan had transformed her years of mechanical knowledge into devastating defensive innovations. The shop itself, every tool, every piece of equipment, had become weaponized against the invaders. In the main garage area, Davis recovered from his earlier humiliation at the diner, spotted movement on the upper level. "There," he shouted, raising his weapon toward Morgan's position. Before he could fire, Echo emerged from behind a tool cabinet, wielding a heavy torque wrench with practiced precision. The wrench connected with Davis's wrist, the sickening crack of breaking bones, followed by his weapon clattering to the floor. "Told you clumsy hands don't belong in a machine shop," Echo remarked coldly, following with a precise strike to his solar plexus that left him gasping on the oil-slick floor. Across the garage, 3 Vipers cornered Delta near the parts storage area. They advanced confidently, believing they had the advantage of numbers. Delta stood seemingly trapped, hands empty, backed against shelving filled with motorcycle parts. "Nowhere to run, lady," one growled, raising a tactical baton. Delta smiled, a predator's expression that should have warned them. "Who's running?" Her hands moved with blinding speed, grabbing components from the shelves behind her. A drive chain, a connecting rod, a heavy piston. Each became a devastating weapon in her trained grasp. The chain whipped out, wrapping around a baton and yanking it from its owner's grasp. The connecting rod struck with surgical precision against knee and elbow joints, disabling without killing. The piston, wielded like a makeshift hammer, shattered a collarbone with mechanical efficiency. In less than 10 seconds, all 3 attackers lay incapacitated, moaning in pain as Delta calmly stepped over them. "Amateur hour," she muttered into her comm. Morgan moved along the upper walkway, maintaining situational awareness while searching for Victor. He was the key, the connection to Hendricks and the broader conspiracy. Through her night vision, she spotted him finally entering through the front, flanked by his 2 most trusted lieutenants. "Victor's inside," she reported. "Moving to intercept." "Copy," Echo responded. "We'll handle the remaining tangos." Morgan descended via a side ladder, landing silently behind a massive tool cabinet. Victor moved cautiously through the garage, his military training evident in his careful scanning and measured pace. Unlike his men, he understood the threat Ghost Protocol operators represented. "I know you're watching Nighthawk," he called, voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. "Your team was always impressive. Hendricks feared what you women could accomplish. That's why he wanted the program shut down." Morgan remained silent, circling to flank his position. "Did you know your unit outperformed every male special operations team on record?" Victor continued, attempting to draw her out. "Completion rates, mission success, adaptability. Ghost Protocol set standards no one could match. That's why you had to be eliminated. Politics disguised as budget concerns." His words confirmed what Morgan had long suspected: their unit hadn't been disbanded for operational failures, but for succeeding too well, threatening entrenched power structures within the military hierarchy. Victor signaled his lieutenants to spread out, searching methodically. "Nothing personal, Nighthawk. We were just following orders in Mosul." "Following orders?" Morgan's voice echoed through the shop, impossible to pinpoint. The eternal excuse for atrocities. Was it orders when you killed unarmed women, when you executed wounded operators who posed no threat? "War isn't clean," Victor replied, his tone hardening. "Your unit understood that better than most." "We understood honor," Morgan countered, moving silently to a new position. "Something you sacrificed for Hendricks' approval." Victor's expression darkened as he approached the Central Bay Area. "Honor doesn't pay bills. Hendricks offered opportunities, legitimate work for our skills, when the government discarded us after Desert Storm. Human trafficking is legitimate work." Morgan's disgust was evident. "Selling military secrets to hostile entities. You're not a soldier anymore, Victor. You're a mercenary without principles." The conversation had achieved its purpose, distracting Victor while Echo and Delta systematically neutralized his remaining forces. Throughout the shop, the sounds of combat had diminished, replaced by the moans of injured Vipers and the occasional radio call that went unanswered. Victor realized his tactical situation was deteriorating. Davis Reynolds' report. He received only static in response. "They can't hear you," Morgan informed him, finally stepping into view across the garage bay. "Your team has been retired." Victor took in her appearance, the trained operative now fully visible beneath the mechanic's facade. He reassessed, adjusting his strategy as he realized he faced not just Morgan, but a coordinated Ghost Protocol response team. "3 survivors," he noted, genuine curiosity in his voice. "How did you manage it?" "Our intel confirmed total elimination of Ghost Protocol." "Your intel was flawed," Morgan replied, moving laterally to maintain optimal positioning. "Our colonel extracted us before your cleanup team arrived. Official records listed us among the dead, his final act of protection before retirement." Understanding dawned in Victor's eyes. "Colonel Lawrence, I should have known he'd have contingencies." "He taught us well," Morgan acknowledged, "including how to disappear and build new lives while waiting for the right moment." Victor's lieutenants moved to flank him, weapons ready, but uncertain against an opponent whose capabilities they couldn't fully gauge. Morgan appeared unconcerned by their presence, her posture relaxed, yet balanced hands empty, but positioned for immediate response. "And now what?" Victor asked. "You kill us all, expose Hendricks. The organization he represents will simply replace him and continue operations." "We're not assassins," Morgan corrected him. "Unlike your team in Mosul, we're gathering evidence which you've conveniently delivered by attacking a civilian business with military tactics." She gestured subtly toward the ceiling, where multiple cameras had recorded the entire assault. "Every moment since you entered has been documented and transmitted to secure servers. Sheriff Cooper has been alerted, along with federal contacts who've been monitoring Hendricks for months." Victor's expression revealed nothing, but the subtle tensing of his shoulders told Morgan her words had hit home. His options were narrowing rapidly. "Hendricks arrives tomorrow for the shipment," Morgan continued. "Human cargo, military secrets, and narcotics, all documented through your organization's sloppy operational security. You're finished, Victor." For a moment, it seemed Victor might surrender, recognizing the inevitable. Then his eyes hardened with resolve. "Not yet." His hand moved to his jacket, producing not a weapon, but a remote detonator. "Insurance policy, charges placed throughout the building before we entered. Enough to ensure no evidence or witnesses remain." Morgan's expression didn't change. "I expected something like that. Delta." From the shadows, Delta's calm voice responded. All devices located and neutralized. Amateur work, really. Military-grade detonators, but civilian explosives. Sloppy. Fury replaced calculation in Victor's eyes. With a signal to his lieutenants, he charged Morgan, directly abandoning firearms for hand-to-hand combat, recognizing that close quarters negated her positional advantage. What followed was a demonstration of Ghost Protocol's legendary combat training. Morgan moved like water, redirecting the first lieutenant's momentum to send him crashing into a tool chest. The second received a precision strike to the brachial plexus, temporarily paralyzing his dominant arm before a follow-up kick collapsed his knee with surgical accuracy. Victor proved more challenging. His special forces background was evident in his technique, disciplined, efficient movements that wasted no energy. He pressed Morgan with combination strikes, forcing her to give ground initially. "You're good," he acknowledged during a momentary pause, both combatants assessing each other. "But I've got 30 pounds and 4 inches on you. Physics wins eventually." Morgan's smile was cold. "Physics is exactly why you'll lose." She changed tactics, abandoning conventional martial arts for Ghost Protocol's specialized combat system, developed specifically for female operators to neutralize larger male opponents. The approach emphasized leverage, precision, and anatomical weaknesses rather than brute strength. Victor lunged with a powerful combination that would have incapacitated a lesser opponent. Morgan redirected rather than blocked, using his forward momentum to unbalance him while delivering a targeted strike to nerve clusters behind his ear. Victor staggered, momentarily disoriented. "Ghost Protocol specialized in asymmetric warfare," Morgan explained, circling her opponent with lethal grace. "We were always outnumbered, always physically outmatched on paper. So we adapted." Victor recovered, adjusting his approach with professional assessment. "Impressive, but adaptation goes both ways." He feinted left, then dropped unexpectedly into a leg sweep that caught Morgan by surprise. She fell back, but converted the motion into a controlled roll, creating distance. Victor pressed his advantage, closing again with renewed confidence. "You should have stayed hid, Nighthawk. Built your quiet life. Now you've exposed yourself and your team for what revenge?" "Justice," Morgan corrected, deflecting his next series of strikes while maneuvering him toward the central bay. "For my teammates, for the women your trafficking operation has destroyed. For Thunder Valley." Their combat continued with increasing intensity, both demonstrating skill sets far beyond conventional military training. Victor's greater mass and strength allowed him to absorb impacts that would have incapacitated others, while Morgan's superior speed and technique kept her from sustaining serious damage. What Victor failed to notice was how Morgan systematically maneuvered him across the garage floor, a choreographed retreat leading him precisely where she wanted. As they neared the hydraulic lift, Morgan suddenly disengaged, creating space between them. "Running out of steam," Victor taunted, advancing confidently. "Running out of patience," Morgan countered. As Victor stepped onto the metal plate covering the service pit, Morgan triggered the trap she'd prepared hours earlier. The plate retracted instantly, dropping Victor 6 feet into the narrow maintenance trench below. Before he could recover, secondary mechanisms activated restraints designed to service motorcycle frames, now securing his arms and legs with mechanical precision. Morgan approached the edge of the pit, looking down at her immobilized opponent. "Like I said, physics wins." Victor struggled against the restraints, fury and disbelief warring in his expression. "This isn't over. Hendricks will never arrive," came a new voice from the garage entrance. Sheriff Cooper stood in the doorway, flanked by several men in tactical gear bearing FBI insignia. Behind them, more federal agents were securing the incapacitated Desert Vipers members throughout the property. "James," Morgan acknowledged, surprise evident in her voice. "I told you to stay out of this." Cooper approached, holstering his sidearm. "And I chose to ignore that suggestion when 25 armed men converged on my town." He surveyed the devastated garage with professional assessment. "Though it appears you had things under control." The FBI tactical team moved efficiently through the space, documenting evidence and securing prisoners. Their leader, a weathered man in his 50s, whose bearing screamed military background, approached Morgan with evident respect. "Agent Taylor, FBI Special Operations Division," he introduced himself. "We've been building a case against Hendricks and his network for 18 months. Your intervention has provided the final evidence we needed." Morgan studied him cautiously. How did you know to be here tonight? Taylor glanced at Cooper. Sheriff Cooper contacted us after finding those vipers gift-wrapped at the lookout point. When our database facial recognition flagged known associates of Hendricks, we accelerated our timetable. Cooper added, I may have mentioned there was a female mechanic in town with unusually effective self-defense skills. Hendricks, Morgan asked, the mission still her priority, despite the unexpected developments. In custody as of 20 minutes ago, Taylor confirmed, picked up at a private airfield 70 miles south, preparing to oversee tomorrow's shipment personally. Echo and Delta emerged from securing the remaining Vipers, joining Morgan as Agent Taylor continued. We've also intercepted the human trafficking shipment, 8 individuals being transported for intelligence exploitation. They're safe now, receiving medical attention. Morgan exchanged glances with her teammates, mission accomplished, though not as they had planned. The 3 Ghost Protocol survivors stood together, their presence a living refutation of the operation that had tried to erase them 6 years earlier. And us, Morgan finally asked the question unavoidable. Taylor smiled slightly. Officially, Ghost Protocol never existed, and its operators died heroically in Mosul. Unofficially, 3 civilian women defended themselves against criminal elements tonight. Beyond that, he shrugged, my jurisdiction ends with Hendricks and his network. The implied message was clear: they were not targets of federal interest. Their secrets would remain secure. My jurisdiction, however, covers damage to local businesses. Cooper interjected, surveying the devastated garage. This place is going to need serious rebuilding. Morgan looked around at what remained of Reynolds Restoration, the business she'd built over 6 years, now partially destroyed in a single night of violence. Strangely, she felt no regret. The shop had served its purpose both as cover and as the instrument of justice long denied. Worth it, she decided. 3 days later, Morgan stood amid the reconstruction efforts at Reynolds Restoration, supervising as contractors repaired damaged walls and replaced broken windows. The garage interior had been cleared of debris, with new equipment already arriving to replace what had been destroyed during the confrontation. Echo and Delta, or rather Samantha and Rebecca, as they were known to the townspeople, worked alongside her, their presence explained, as old friends helping during a crisis. The 3 women moved with the comfortable familiarity of longtime teammates, though they carefully maintained their civilian personas when others were present. Earl and Danny had returned from their temporary safe house, joining the community-wide effort to restore the shop. Martha provided food for the workers, her diner becoming command central for the reconstruction project. Throughout Thunder Valley, residents contributed what they could: tools, materials, labor, to help rebuild what many now viewed as the town's protective bulwark against outside threats. Sheriff Cooper approached as Morgan was reviewing blueprints for the improved layout, carrying coffee and what appeared to be official documents. Thought you might need this, he said, handing her the coffee. And these just arrived from the county office, expedited permits for all the modifications you're planning. Morgan accepted both with genuine gratitude. Thanks, James, for everything. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the reconstruction progress. Cooper had maintained remarkable discretion about the events 3 nights earlier, his official report noting only that a criminal motorcycle gang attempted to extort local businesses and met with unexpected resistance. The Desert Vipers' military-style assault had been attributed to their background as veterans, with no mention of Ghost Protocol or Morgan's true identity. FBI finished processing the last of the Vipers this morning, Cooper finally said. Victor's talking, trading information for considerations. Seems Hendricks' operation went deeper than anyone suspected. Morgan nodded, unsurprised. Men like that always have contingencies and connections. Taylor mentioned something interesting before they left. Cooper continued carefully. Said 3 positions just opened in a specialized federal consultation unit. No field work, just training and advisory roles. Said the right candidates might find it appropriate. Morgan glanced toward Echo and Delta, who were helping Earl install new security doors, their expertise evident despite their casual manner. Some people aren't built for retirement, she acknowledged, but others find exactly what they need in unexpected places. Cooper studied her profile, the question unspoken but clear. This is home now, Morgan answered simply. Has been for 6 years. Even after everything that happened. Especially after everything that happened. Morgan gestured toward Danny, who was earnestly learning proper welding technique from one of the contractors. There's value in building something real, in teaching the next generation. Cooper nodded, understanding. The town council's holding an emergency session tonight. They're creating a special citation for extraordinary service to the community. 3 recipients. Morgan raised an eyebrow. Not big on public recognition. Too bad, Cooper replied with a rare smile. It's unanimous, 7 o'clock at the town hall. Wear something nice. As he walked away, Earl approached his arm, still in a sling, but his spirits evidently high. Place is coming together better than before, he observed, surveying the improvements. Silver linings, I suppose. How's the arm? Morgan asked. Doc says 4 weeks in this contraption, then good as new. Earl dismissed his injury with typical stoicism. Small price for seeing those vipers get what they deserved. Morgan nodded, appreciating his perspective. Danny's doing well with the reconstruction work. Boy's found his calling, I think, Earl agreed, watching his grandson with evident pride. Not just with engines anymore. Talks about engineering school now. Says he wants to build things that last. A comfortable silence settled between them before Earl spoke again, his voice lower and more serious. Those friends of yours, they're like you, aren't they, from before? Morgan considered deflecting, but chose honesty instead. We served together, lost everything together, found our ways separately afterward. Earl nodded slowly. Family comes in different forms. Sometimes it's blood, sometimes it's forged in fire. He glanced meaningfully at Echo and Delta. Those bonds don't break easy. No, Morgan agreed softly. They don't. They heading back to their lives soon. Tomorrow, Morgan confirmed. They have their own paths. Earl studied her face carefully. And you're staying. It wasn't a question, but Morgan answered anyway. I'm staying. The older man's weathered face creased in a smile. Good. Danny still has a lot to learn about shovelhead engines. And I suspect you've got a few other skills worth passing on when the time's right. Morgan raised an eyebrow. Motorcycle maintenance is complicated enough. Earl's laugh was knowing. Sure, let's call it that. He patted her shoulder with his good hand. Martha's bringing lunch for everyone in 15. Don't work through it. Woman takes it personally when people skip her cooking. As Earl walked away, Morgan turned back to the blueprints, though her mind was elsewhere. The past week had transformed everything, exposing her secret identity, eliminating a threat she'd thought long behind her, and paradoxically strengthening her connection to Thunder Valley rather than severing it. Echo approached, wiping grease from her hands. Shop's going to be better than ever, she observed, thinking of installing some of those special modifications we discussed. Morgan smiled slightly. A few discreet improvements seemed prudent. Taylor's offer is genuine, you know, Echo said after ensuring no one was within earshot. Advisory roles, stateside assignments only. The program they're developing needs experienced operators. I have a job, Morgan replied simply. Echo studied her friend with knowing eyes. You've changed. 6 years ago, you lived for the mission. Still do, Morgan countered, gesturing toward the community working together to rebuild her shop. Just a different kind of mission now. 1 month later, Reynolds Restoration celebrated its grand reopening with a town-wide barbecue. The renovated shop gleamed with new equipment alongside carefully preserved vintage elements. The neon sign, miraculously undamaged during the confrontation, cast its warm glow across the gathered crowd as sunset painted the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Morgan moved through the celebration, accepting congratulations and well wishes from townspeople who now regarded her with a mixture of respect and awe. The full truth of that night had never been officially disclosed, but as with all small towns, stories had circulated, growing more elaborate with each retelling. In the emerging local legend, Morgan and her visiting friends had driven off a motorcycle gang using nothing but mechanical tools and determination. The reality remained known only to a select few. Earl and Danny, who had witnessed enough to understand the fundamentals, if not the details. Sheriff Cooper, whose official silence spoke volumes. Martha, who had seen the aftermath and drawn her own conclusions. And of course, Echo and Delta, who had returned to their respective lives carrying the shared secret of Thunder Valley. As the celebration continued, Morgan slipped away briefly to the quiet of her office, the one room she'd insisted on rebuilding exactly as it had been before. The familiar space with its vintage motorcycle posters and carefully organized files represented continuity amid change. A small package sat on her desk, delivered that morning with government markings but no return address. Inside, she'd found a simple medallion bearing the Ghost Protocol insignia, accompanied by a handwritten note. Justice served, records sealed, your choice now, L. Colonel Lawrence's message confirmed what Agent Taylor had implied: her past had been officially buried again, her actions in Thunder Valley attributed to civilian self-defense rather than specialized training. The choice he referenced was clear: continue the life she'd built or return to service in some capacity. Morgan tucked the medallion into her desk drawer beside the satellite phone she'd never have to use again. The choice had been made years ago when she first drove into Thunder Valley and saw potential for rebuilding more than just motorcycles. A knock at the office door interrupted her thoughts. Danny stood there, excitement evident in his expression. "Morgan, you gotta come see Grandpa. Earl just arrived with your surprise." Curious Morgan followed him to the front of the building where a small crowd had gathered around Earl's pickup truck. In the bed, carefully secured and partially covered with a tarp, sat the unmistakable frame of a 1952 Harley-Davidson Panhead, one of the most iconic motorcycles in American history and among the most challenging restoration projects that a mechanic could undertake. Earl stood beside the truck, genuine pleasure in his eyes as Morgan approached. "Found it in a barn outside Flagstaff," he explained. "Owner had it since '65, parked it in '82 when the transmission gave out. Hasn't run in 40 years. Morgan circled the truck, professional assessment already cataloging the work required. The panhead was in rough condition, surface rust covering most components. Leather seat cracked from aged tires rotted away to bare rims, but the frame appeared solid and the engine, while seized, seemed structurally intact. "It's a complete restoration project," Earl continued. "Figure it might keep you busy for a while, give you a reason to stick around." Morgan understood the gift for what it was: not just a motorcycle, but an anchor to the community, a project requiring months of dedicated work. Earl's way of ensuring she remained connected to the life she'd built. "Perfect timing," she said, genuine emotion making her voice slightly rough. "I've been thinking about expanding into vintage restorations." Danny peered at the ancient machine with teenage skepticism. "Can this thing actually be fixed? It looks dead." "Nothing's ever truly dead if enough of the original remains," Morgan replied, running her hand along the rusted handlebars. "Just needs someone patient enough to bring it back to life." The symbolism wasn't lost on Earl, who shared a knowing look with Morgan before addressing the gathered crowd. "All right, folks, let's get this piece of history into its new home. Danny helped me with the ramp." As the celebration continued around her, Morgan found herself truly at peace for the first time in years. The ghost of Mosul had been laid to rest. Hendricks and his operation were dismantled. Victor and the Desert Vipers would spend decades in federal custody. Most importantly, Thunder Valley, her town, her people, was safe. The rebuilt Reynolds Restoration represented more than just a business now. It stood as testament to resilience, to community, and to the possibility of rebuilding what others had tried to destroy. Just like the panhead that would soon occupy her workshop, Morgan herself had been restored not to what she was before, but to something authentic and enduring. 2 weeks later, as autumn brought cooler temperatures to the desert, Morgan was working late in the shop. The panhead restoration had begun in earnest, the engine disassembled across her workbench as she meticulously cleaned and inspected each component. Danny had stayed late to assist, absorbing her teachings about the evolution of Harley engines with eager attention. After the teenager departed for home, Morgan continued working alone, finding satisfaction in the methodical process of bringing mechanical history back to life. The radio played Johnny Cash's "I've Been Everywhere" as she carefully restored the timing gears to factory specifications. The distant rumble of motorcycles broke her concentration, an all too familiar sound that still triggered momentary tension. Morgan listened carefully, distinguishing 3 bikes approaching their engines unfamiliar to her trained ear. She set down her tools and moved to the security monitor, watching as 3 motorcycles pulled into the gravel lot. Their riders, all male, all wearing leather cuts, marking them as members of a club she didn't recognize, dismounted and approached the entrance. Morgan pressed the security button that would alert Sheriff Cooper of precaution, rather than panic, before wiping her hands and moving to the front of the shop. Through the glass door, she studied the visitors, mid-40s to early 60s. Military haircuts, the bearing of veterans rather than criminals. Their patches identified them as the Desert Guardians MC. The leader, a gray-haired man with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades in the sun, knocked respectfully rather than pounding. Morgan opened the door partway, her stance casual but prepared. "Shop's closed," she said evenly. "Open tomorrow at 8. "Ma'am," the leader addressed her with unexpected courtesy, "we're not here for service. We heard about what happened with the Desert Vipers. Word travels in the motorcycle community." Morgan remained silent, waiting. "We're a veterans riding club," he continued, gesturing to their cuts. "Schools of us served in Desert Storm, some in Afghanistan later. We police our own try to keep the criminal elements from giving military riders a bad name." He extended a weathered hand. "Name's Richards, former Army Rangers. These are my brothers, Miller and Hernandez. We wanted to personally thank you for shutting down Victor's operation. His crew was poison to the riding community and a disgrace to veterans everywhere." Morgan studied them carefully before accepting the handshake. "You rode a long way just to say thanks." Richards nodded. "Also wanted to let you know the legitimate clubs will be sending business your way. Word is you know Harley's better than anyone in 3 states. "I manage," Morgan replied, echoing her response to Victor from weeks earlier, though with none of the underlying tension. Richard smiled slightly, recognizing a fellow veteran, despite the minimal information. "If you ever need anything, parts assistance, security, the Desert Guardians, consider Reynolds Restoration under our protection. Not that you seem to need it." The sincere offer, free of intimidation or expectation, represented everything the Desert Vipers had: corrupted veterans, supporting each other and their communities rather than exploiting them. Morgan found herself returning the smile. "I appreciate that. First beer's on the house if you're ever passing through during business hours." As the men returned to their motorcycles, Morgan watched from the doorway, reflecting on the cyclical nature of redemption. The Desert Vipers' corrupted veterans who had preyed on the vulnerable had been replaced by men who honored their service through community support rather than exploitation. Sheriff Cooper's cruiser pulled up just as the Desert Guardians were departing, the riders exchanging respectful nods with the lawmen before continuing on their way. Cooper approached Morgan with questioning concern. "Everything okay? Got your alert." "False alarm," Morgan assured him. "Just some veterans paying respects." Cooper studied the departing motorcycles. "Desert Guardians, good guys from what I hear, run charity rides for wounded warriors, motorcycle safety courses for returning veterans. The opposite of Victor's crew," Morgan observed. "Same background, different choices," Cooper agreed. He turned to Morgan with a slight smile. "Speaking of choices, heard anything from your friends?" Morgan understood he meant Echo and Delta. "They're doing well, found work that suits their particular skills." Cooper nodded, satisfied. "And you? Any regrets about staying?" Morgan looked back at her shop, at the vintage panhead in progress, at the community that had embraced her despite not knowing her full story, at the life she had built from the ashes of her former existence. "None," she said simply. As Cooper departed with a casual wave, Morgan returned to her workbench in the disassembled panhead engine. Her hands resumed their practiced dance across the mechanical components, restoring function to what others had discarded as beyond repair. Outside, the desert night embraced Thunder Valley in peaceful darkness, broken only by the neon glow of signs along the old highway, beacons of civilization in the wilderness, just like the connections Morgan had forged here. Connections that had withstood the ultimate test and emerged stronger. She worked late into the night, Johnny Cash giving way to Creedence Clearwater Revival, then Bruce Springsteen, the soundtrack to a life reclaimed rather than merely survived. Tomorrow would bring customers with motorcycles needing repair, Earl with his chest set for their weekly game, Danny eager to learn more about the panhead restoration. Morgan Reynolds, once known as Nighthawk, now known simply as the best motorcycle mechanic in 3 counties, had finally found her peace in the most unexpected of places, a small desert town where she had stopped running and started rebuilding. And if trouble ever found its way to Thunder Valley again, well, the woman who repaired motorcycles had proven quite capable of repairing other things, like broken bones and justice.